Welcome to Podcetera. Each episode is a journey of discovery as we delve into topics that pique our curiosity and yours. We feature in-depth interviews with fascinating individuals who have extraordinary stories to share.
I'm Renee Lego.
And I'm Joelle Ludovich. And this
is Podcetera. Erica Vanstone, welcome to Podcetera.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
Before the roller derby, filmmaking, writing, community activism, what was little Erica like? Tell us about your background. What were the early signs that you had that you'd end up telling stories in so many different ways?
So I live in Philadelphia now, but I grew up in a very rural central Massachusetts, a town called Charlton. And as I like to say, there were more cows than people. And so I'm a Gen Xer, right? And I was born in the 70s, and I had one of the last adolescences without technology, right? And what I really gravitated towards always was this idea of storytelling. I was a voracious reader. I loved music. I was a musician. And I was a big nerd. Or as one of my friends likes to tell it, I was the one who gave all of the teachers gray hairs, not because I was a bad student, but because I was the one asking 10,000 questions and couldn't even let them get to the lesson. So I think I started this life wanting to tell stories because I wanted to hear stories. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to understand what people's stories were. And I think for such a long time, I was pretty obsessed with the idea of trying to find my own voice, right? And I think that that's actually one of the things that maybe took me the longest. I feel like in many ways I'm a late bloomer when it comes to storytelling, even though I met both of you at a television station doing public television. And so in that capacity, I was a storyteller also. So eventually I went to NYU Film. I graduated from NYU Film and I moved down to Philadelphia, which is where I met y'all. And I just was in this process of telling other people's stories, and documentary was very appealing to me for that reason. So we worked in television. I worked as a newspaper editor for a while. I made my own documentaries, but it felt like there was something else in me. I just wasn't quite sure how to access it. And I think maybe a lot of other creative people have had that struggle where you have these things that you want to kind of get out and these skills you want to utilize, but maybe you don't always have the stories to tell. So I like to think of it as me having taken all of this time to build up the material of my own life to be able to tell that story.
Great answer. For listeners who might be new to roller derby, can you give us the elevator pitch version of the sport and what makes women's roller derby so unique?
So the elevator pitch of roller derby is you score points by passing opponents. And that sounds easy, but it is not. So each team has what is called a jammer or a point scorer, which is the star that you see on the helmets. And at any given jam, there's up to 4 blockers who are trying to prevent you from getting that point, and then also try to help their own jammer. So there's up to 10 people on the track at any given increment of gameplay. And when that whistle blows to start the gameplay, each jammer tries to get through the pack at least once. And once they do, for every subsequent pass, they score points for opponents that they pass. So really the goal is kind of to get through that mess of people. And for every opponent that you pass, you're going to get a point.
Are there points for throwing elbows?
There are not. And there are penalties for throwing elbows, though.
Did you participate in playing roller derby? And then can you talk a little bit about your role within the world of roller derby?
I didn't even start as a skater. What's weird is that I like to say that I did roller derby probably completely backwards from everybody else. When most people first come to roller derby, if they're into it and they want to do it, they're going to see roller derby and they're going to go, that is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I want to do it. When I saw it, That is not what I thought. Because I was like, I'm not coordinated. I think I might die. I will not try this. However, that sort of curiosity in my head made me look at this and I said, I want to know what the heck is going on. Like I'm looking at this tangle of bodies on skates on the track and I have no idea how this game works. Number one, I want to know how this game works. Number two, I want to help explain it to people. And I had worked with both of you at WIBE back in the day, and through that, I had done pledge drives, right? So I had done on-air broadcasts before. So I felt totally comfortable picking up a microphone and sort of learning and talking at the same time. And that was the role that I kind of fell into initially was I want to be an announcer. I want to learn the sport through announcing, kind of understand it, and then help other people understand it. And then gradually, it's a sport that's very intricate, but as any sports fan knows, right, like baseball, people will be like, it is the simplest, most complicated sport in the world, right?
Yeah.
You're supposed to hit a ball and run around the bases, but there are so many rules. And that's how roller derby is. So I decided that my next thing, I did really want to try to get on skates, but I wasn't ready to hit anybody yet. So I started to be an on skates referee. And then that put a lot of information back into my announcing because I suddenly understood the rules better. I knew how to explain those nuances better. And then I think that helped to inform some of the broadcasts that I was putting together for the Women's Flat Track Derby Association. And I came to a place where I realized that there was an opportunity in front of roller derby, which was that the technology that was coming into existence around like 2007, 2008 was streaming stuff, right? It was like Justin TV and the precursor of Twitch and online video and live video and YouTube. So it's hard to imagine our lives without those things now. But those things were just coming into existence when we were plotting out roller derby broadcast. So we had an opportunity to try to come up with some standards for how roller derby should be shot. Because up until that point, there really had not been sort of a standard way to shoot it. And then I gradually decided that it was important for me to start playing. Because again, I really just kind of kept digging further into the sport. And the further I got into it, the more I was like, well, I don't think I cannot play this sport because I have to know. Like I have to know how it feels and what it's like to actually play. And then I went on to be the executive director of the governing body. So I kind of like, I don't know, I started from the bottom. I basically interned my way to executive director.
It's impressive.
Since you mentioned pledge drives, I think that going from a live episode of Philly Live, turning over in 2 minutes to a live pledge drive, and then doing a pledge drive in multiple languages that you don't speak, it seems like that's kind of like roller derby in a way.
Yes, it's exactly like that. And we were also asking for money because we had pay-per-view. So it was basically, asking folks to pay for the broadcast. So it is a direct form of marketing. 100%. That's hard.
Yeah.
When it was starting in Philadelphia, I had some friends involved and they always had unique roller derby names. So what was your roller derby name and what was the story behind it?
It's in the book, but my name is Hyman Heaven. And then, exactly. So I decided my name was Hyman Heaven. And then I want to say 3 weeks later, I learned that I was pregnant with my son. And I was like, well, that's maybe not as funny as I thought it was anymore. And so eventually I shortened it to Double H. And that's actually one of the things that has happened that I talk about in the book is that people had come up with these names. And then at a certain point, maybe those names were deemed offensive or inappropriate. And folks would have to kind of like rethink their strategy and change their names. And maybe like it's really a conversation that dovetails with how the community is very inclusive. So if there were things that came up within conversations where people were like, hey, you know what? That name's like, just like a little bit offensive. You might want to rethink it. We opened the way for those conversations. But I started out as Hyman Heaven, then shortened it to Double H. And then by the end, I was actually skating under Erica Vanstone because I was like, let's just integrate. Let's just fully integrate me.
Are there any rules that govern what you can and can't name yourself?
Just to be thoughtful and to understand that roller derby now extends to kids and adults. And so it's not that necessarily all of the adults are specifically role models, but most of the adult clubs will have junior clubs attached to them that also will do events alongside them. And so you just want to be thoughtful about how you are engaging with the public, I guess.
Yeah.
I've known some just kind of unique names, like Summer Assault. I know you know that name, right? And then, some of the teams' names as well were rather unique. I mean, it's going back a ways, so I don't remember all of them. But yeah, there's a few people that I knew that had some unique names and would actually, like, I know that she would come out and do like a somersault when they would announce her. So,
Do you have any funny or surprising stories that happened when you were skating?
Most of the time, the thing that kept me from playing roller derby was a fear of getting hurt, right? And that's kind of like why most people will look at roller derby and say, I don't know if that's for me. It's obviously because it looks like you could get hurt. And I think the WFTDA and its insurance arm do a really good job of creating safety standards for the sport so that you do learn how to roller skate safely. You do learn how to play the sport as safely as possible, but you're going to probably fall a lot, right? Like that's part of the point of the sport, is to learn how to fall and get back up, which is also part of the book. But I think I was really very concerned about, what's going to happen if I ever get injured? Am I ever going to get hurt? And how am I going to feel? And, that was kind of like the biggest fear of most folks playing the sport also. Even though we know that like we love it and it's so much fun, but there is a point in the book that I talk about where I was skating in a game and I got a shoulder to the face and I got my nose very close to broken and I was gushing blood all over the track. And it was my first injury. And I think what was surprising to me is that in that moment, I wasn't scared. I was angry. I was like, let me back on the track. Like, how dare you? And so I think what surprised me the most was my reaction to getting injured. And I think most people were like, oh no, I'm gonna be afraid. And a lot of folks, I think, have had the same experience as I have, where it's if you get injured, you're like, I can't believe I missed the rest of the game. I was doing so well. I was like in the middle of these 3 things that I was doing, and I had to sit there and watch as the rest of the game was played without me. So it wasn't so much like, woe is me, I'm injured. It was like, let me back in, coach.
How long did it take you to get to a level where you felt you were really competitive, where you felt like you were, a pretty good player?
I made it to the all-star team, but I did not ever play an A-team game, which was fine with me because by the time I started playing, I was an older player. I'm not going to say old because there are women of every age playing the sport of roller derby. But I think what I had to my advantage was my knowledge of the game, actually. And I think what made me a competitive player wasn't so much my athleticism, but my understanding strategically of how to exploit the rules and what the team needed to do to execute a strategy. So just like in the sport of football, or really like any team sport, but football I think is one that most Americans understand, you are sort of using your whole line to execute a play together. So it's less like baseball where everybody's kind of doing something different on the field. Football or rugby, you're on the field trying to execute a thing together in a formation. So roller derby is a little bit like that. And then really your jammer is almost like a running back. So they're trying to get through this tangle of people to a point which is like through the track, right? Like through the wall of bodies and further down the track. So understanding the dynamics, not just of how like me and my body reacts, but understanding where every single person needs to be on the track, because I had watched so many hours of footage, having put together broadcast. I'd watched so many different teams executing the same plays that I knew where people were going, like not just where they were, but where they were trying to get to. And so I also feel like it took me years to build that knowledge, but I think that's what made me a competitive player, as opposed to like, I was really fast because I wasn't.
So your book, Don't Let Them Eat the Baby, can you tell us what inspired it? And can you talk a little bit about the title?
During the pandemic, when I was still working in roller derby, it was a very isolating time, I think, for most people because we were quarantined. I was the executive director of the Women's Flat Track Derby Association, and we all worked remotely, which was great. But I had 40,000 skaters and officials around the world who were waiting for me to make a policy in a pandemic about whether or not people should play. And so I have to say, I'm just so proud of the organization and the board of directors and the staff and the volunteers who came forward to put together a COVID policy with me. And it was actually like pretty highly lauded, like Wired Magazine downloaded it, and Samantha Bee, Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, did a segment on it. And so I feel like we took a really heartbreaking situation, and not only did we do the best we could, we did amazing work. However, like, I don't really know if it's possible to kind of explain the toll, like the emotional toll that took on me, having to kind of manage the lives of all those people. And so during the day, I would sort of do math, because that's what I did during COVID. I just kind of like looked at all of the CDC recommendations and we did math. And then at night, I worked on writing a book. And it wasn't this book. It was a science fiction book that I've been working on. And writing is kind of what kept me together. Writing and skating. I would do a lot of outdoor trail skating. I would do park skating at the local skate parks, but really coming back to writing. So I made it through the pandemic. I had not just a science fiction book, I had the sequel written, and then a couple of other, like 3/4 of the way projects for other things. I started shopping the science fiction book for a little while and got like, hey, we love your writing. The book is cool. This isn't maybe what we're, looking for right now. And that, I think, is one of the really, actually silently the biggest challenge of the publishing industry, is that if you're not what anybody wants, it doesn't matter how good your book is. You're not going to get picked up. So I heard that feedback and I really thought about it. And I said, well, what could the market really use? And I was like, I have this story that I've been thinking about telling about the sport of roller derby. And in working with you at YBE, and before that, I worked at Philly Weekly and was a journalist. So nonfiction and documentary type processes were really familiar to me. So I said, maybe I need to write sort of a nonfiction book about my experiences in the sport of roller derby, going from a mom to a skater to a executive director, a broadcaster, putting the sport on pay-per-view on our platforms, and then putting it on ESPN, and then taking it back off ESPN. So I was like, this is a story that is unlike maybe anybody else's that's out there. So I put the pitch together and I brought it to a writers' conference, and the woman, Amy Giuffrida, who eventually became my agent, was like, I love it, go write it. Because in nonfiction, you're actually pitching concepts. You haven't necessarily written the book. So I was like, okay, I'll go write it. And then I did, and she offered to become my agent. So, and then from there, though, it was probably 3 or 4 iterations. We shopped it to a bunch of publishing houses. And then when I woke up sort of in January of this year, as a lot of people did, and I was like, I don't know how much time women kind of have, like, in this country to do what they want to do creatively. I don't know how much time, like, people in general have the ability to come forward and speak their minds. And I had been talking to Banana Pitch Press and my colleague Michelle Kitcherer, who runs it, who's amazing and put her own book out earlier this year. And she was like, well, I would love to go for it. Would you like to do this? And I was like, yes, can we put it out this fall? And she's like, if we hustle. So we put it out this fall, and eating the baby is a roller derby strategy. And it basically is a way of capturing your opposing team's jammer. And so don't let them eat the baby is really kind of a way of saying, like, don't let them hold you back.
Really interesting. Yeah, I was really interested to hear where that title came from.
There were no babies harmed in the making of this book, Renee.
Don't eat my baby.
Don't eat the baby.
That's deep. Who knew? Did writing the book change how you see the sport or its community?
No, but I do kind of wonder if people who are involved in roller derby will be enlightened when they read kind of what I went through. I think some of the things that I talk about in the book are things that I haven't necessarily talked about in public before. Like, I hadn't necessarily talked about kind of the heartbreak that I went through when in 2015 I developed this fantastic collaboration with ESPN. My friend Todd Myers used to work in production for ESPN, and he was sort of the first point of contact for roller derby. And he was such a champion for women's sports. And I think that was kind of the thing that I wanted to make clear to everybody, is that I think there's this impression that if a sport is good enough, right, quote, good enough, interesting enough, exciting enough, whatever, then there's no reason why it couldn't get all of the traction in the world. And people say things to me all the time like, well, look at pickleball, or, well, look at cornhole. Cornhole's on ESPN. That's because those sports have champions on the inside who are like, hey, guess what we could do with this? And often those sports are making compromises in order to achieve those results, right? Like what we were asked to do, I think we had a fantastic person on the inside who was championing us. And we had just, I think, what is still the quintessential roller derby game, the 2015 championships that broadcast on their streaming platform, which was then ESPN3. And it was just like, it was the perfect storm. There was like an article that came out on ESPN.com like a day or two later about our gender policy and how inclusive it was. And we were on ESPN3 and it was like raining magic. And then all of a sudden, a round of layoffs happened at ESPN. And so Todd was gone and we lost that champion. Once you lose that person on the inside of a network who's fighting for you, it's like you don't really exist and you're having to explain yourself over and over again. And I had this moment in the book that I describe in talking to a producer. And mind you, roller derby had been on ESPN before. But, you know, this producer kind of pulled me aside and he was like, so tell me, is roller derby fake? And I was like, have you watched it? Like, we're on your network. Did you look at it? And I realized that they didn't. Like, they didn't care. They didn't know. And I think that was really what was challenging to me. But that's the point of the book, is would you rather present an iteration of yourself that's palatable for other people and get this wider exposure and platform? Or would you rather remain authentic to who you are at all times, knowing full well that maybe the world is not ready for you yet? And that was one of the things that I think folks might not really have understood about what I was navigating in the WFTDA with roller derby.
With inclusivity being on the outs in this country, unfortunately, any concerns that will filter into roller derby?
You know, there have been quite a few legal disputes that a lot of our clubs have had to go through. There was one that was just, I think, overturned in Long Island. The club in Long Island had been battling the county, Nassau County, because Nassau County had basically flipped the switch and said transgender women are not allowed in women's sports. And the roller derby league was like, the hell they aren't. Like, we're taking this all the way to the top. And I think this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of the judicial system, right? I think my time in roller derby taught me the critical nature of policy. And so what I see unfolding is kind of this very, very deliberate strategy of the right to kind of get judges into those seats so that when folks come forward and say, hey, our rights are actually being stepped on here with what's happening, things will go in the favor of the party in vogue at the time, right? And I think that that's what's really challenging, is that it's not just going to affect roller derby, it's going to affect everybody. And it already has started to do that. But is roller derby going to stop being roller derby because of it? No.
We didn't ask you to prepare something, but I'm wondering if you might read an excerpt.
Oh, I was like, you don't want me to sing, do you?
Oh, well, if you want to sing it,
No.
that'd be great.
So, you know what's funny is I hadn't read my book since it went to press in the spring. And someone was like, have you read your book lately? And I was like, no, I haven't read my book since March. So
What, did it change?
no, but it's just one of those things where you're so busy doing all of these things. Like, why would I sit down and read my book again? But this is about 2 pages of chapter 3, Identity Crisis. March 2007, Feasterville, Pennsylvania. It's 10 a.m. on a Friday, a few months later. I'm 20 miles outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs, looking around the Sportsplex, a bright white hangar with 2 roller hockey rinks. And I have 2 problems. Well, 3. The first is that I signed up to announce a game of roller derby at this tournament on a Friday morning. I'm still moderately hungover from my Thursday night happy hour. Tasting last night's karaoke beer, I watch as a gaggle of girls in booty shorts and fishnets walk past with skates slung over their shoulders. I have no idea why half-sauce karaoke antics made me think I could command a room with a microphone, but in one of my braver moments, I signed up for this. Reporting as a volunteer for Philly Roller Girls' first ever tournament, I'm questioning my logic, pulling my red hair back into a hasty ponytail over my makeup-less face. I glance down at my beat-up brown cowboy boots with the hole at the pinky toe. I'm a fish out of water, only I'm not so sure what this water even is yet. My second problem, which is shared by most people on the planet right now, is that I have no idea how the game of roller derby is even played. Yet here I am, showing up on a Friday morning to talk about it on a microphone. The third problem arrives as my co-announcer introduces himself. Chip Queso, he says. He extends his hand. A roller derby legend I've heard of on the internet, Chip's just under my height with salt and pepper sideburns. Damn, I need to find a good roller derby name like this. I pat the hastily scrawled Erica on my name tag. I don't have a derby name yet. No worries, you'll find a good one, Chip says. Queso is from Texas Roller Girls, founders of the sport. And I'm more than a little intimidated by him. Choosing a roller derby name feels so important. It has to be funny or outrageous or confident. Right now, I'm none of these things. I pick up a stack of papers and eye the roster from Philly's home team, the Heavy Metal Hookers. Felony Griffith, Valhalla, Eurothrash. Felony, a tall redhead, chose her name because she's on actual house arrest. I hear she wears an ankle bracelet under her socks. I tuck the top of my t-shirt into baggy jeans and reread the roster. Minutes later, the Hookers face off against a team from Connecticut. A referee blows one short whistle and the blockers roll forward looking over their shoulders. A second whistle starts the jammers, the point scorers behind them. Then the mass of bodies lurches counterclockwise. The Hookers jammer, a platinum blonde with a star on her helmet, pushes through to the other side. Lead jammer, Heavy Metal Hookers, Queso cries into his microphone. All I can do is nod and repeat his words. Lead jammer, I squawk, swallowing hard. I know this means she can call off this whole mess whenever she wants to. The Hookers jammer, wearing a green and black star, races out of the fray and around the first turn of the oval track, then the second. As she hits the straightaway coming towards us, one of the opposing team's blockers cashes up and crashes into her. She sails through the outside referee lane and slams her face down onto the floor next to me. You all right? I ask, watching her crawl to her knees. Fuck, she says, not noticing me. Despite wearing a mouthguard, I catch the inside of her mouth now coated in blood. A red-stained grin cracks her face as she gets up and storms back into the action. The hair on the back of my neck stands in a good way. This is heaven, I think. I'm in heaven. Not because I know what I'm looking at, but because I don't care that I don't know. And Fred Astaire's voice springs into my head, solving at least one of my problems for the day.
Wow.
Very nice.
So were there any books or authors or voices that influenced your writing style?
The other thing about this book that I should say is I wrote it initially in first person, like present tense narrative. And I didn't feel like it was quite right. I wrote it and I did maybe 2 or 3 drafts that way. And it was actually much longer than this. And I was like, there was just something about it that felt like it wasn't quite nailing it for me. Both of you are documentary or journalistic producers and directors of, I mean, you do other things, but you've done that before. So you understand you really need to hit the right tone. And sometimes a documentary story involves you as interviewers asking questions as part of the narrative. And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's you giving an introduction and sometimes it isn't. So in the craft of putting this book together, what I realized it needed was that straight historical context for people. So the book is actually broken up into vignettes like that. And then I'm also backfilling with interviews from people and filling in history for people because I needed to kind of tell 2 stories at the same time. I needed to tell the story of me and my experiences, but then also the sport. And it was like telling a story of the bus and then being a passenger of the bus and then driving the bus. And the way that I felt like I could do that the best was through actually shifting perspectives. And I have to say, like, that was a super risky gamble, right? Because I don't know, like, you are both artists and content makers, and you know when something feels like it's hitting the notes you want it to hit as a creator. And it just didn't kind of hit the meat of the story that I wanted to tell in just my voice alone. So I hadn't done a ton of work researching nonfiction writers who kind of switch voices. But what I had been doing at the time is I was reading this book that is both fiction and nonfiction at the same time. It's this incredible book called Bao Ninh by Bao Ninh, the writer Bao Ninh, who was a survivor of the Vietnam War. And it's about his experiences in the military during that time. And it is both narrative and non-narrative. And I think that type of genre blurring appeals to me because I am neurodivergent and it's really hard for me to think in one way at any one given time. And so there was a part of me when I was writing this where I needed to tell my story, but then I needed to pull everybody aside and be like, okay, here's what was happening in roller derby in general when I was experiencing this. And it actually, I think it kind of transformed the book because I feel like it's not just my story, it's the sports story.
Your writing, it conjures up a lot of imagery. It's very detailed, very descriptive. Were you taking notes at the time or just mental notes of, different things that you experienced?
No, I was not necessarily taking notes at the time. It's funny because, before the show started, Renee, you and I were talking about TikTok. I saw this, I saw this video recently about kind of different types of thinkers. And I am a visual thinker and processor. And one TikTok that I saw recently was talking about how, like, a lot of people, when they remember things, don't necessarily visualize it. I have always been like a visual processor. And so when I think of memories, I see them. And so I think another reason that I do that is because I want to try to maintain as much objectivity in me as a character as possible. And I want the reader to be able to understand what I'm walking into. So I do have a very sensory experience when I'm remembering these memories. But at the same time, I had written an iteration of this book straight up as me in first person, kind of like remembering these things as they happen. And it just felt like the voice just felt whiny to me, right? Like I was just like, oh, why do I sound this way? And so I think my way of trying to to solve that problem was to bring more history and objectivity into it, and then to also really think about bringing the reader into each experience with me so that it wasn't me necessarily telling them how I felt all the time, but they could experience it for themselves any way they wanted to.
I want to talk to you about Bob Ray's film. So Hell on Wheels is considered a landmark documentary on the modern revival of women's roller derby. It was created here in Austin, and it gave a lot of people their first look at roller derby, right? What's your take on the impact of that film, and have you seen it?
Yes, it's been a minute. And I would say one of the things that I talk about in the book is not necessarily that film, but I talk about the impact of the film Whip It. So Whip It came out during a time when roller derby let me clarify this as well. There's flat track roller derby, and then there's banked track roller derby. The modern revival of both started in Austin. So you're on hallowed ground, Renee.
I am.
And they started actually out of the same club, the same league. Really what happened was there was sort of this divergence from one club to the other. And then the folks who eventually started flat track, this is all in the book also, really just kind of were like, well, we're going to just kind of take our creative property and go over here and start our own thing then. And they were able to do that. But by the time we get to 2009, 2010, when Whip It was coming out, that movie was about bank track. So you had major stars in that film. It didn't really do that great at the box office, but it was big enough that the production came to the WFTDA teams and they were like, would you like to cross promote with us? Right? So they would have all these roller derby skaters come out from flat track. Only the problem was that this movie was bank track. So people would come out to the flat track events that they were cross promoting with, and they were like, where are the elbows to the face? Where is the bank track? Where's the, people pushing and tripping each other? And it was like a huge dichotomy that kind of was there, right? And at the time, I was pitching a WF, the Women's Flat Track Derby Association was the governing body for the sport and still is. And I basically went to them and was like, hey, every single person is bringing a webcam and setting it up someplace different at a track. What would you think about coming up with like a unified broadcast concept where we put the cameras in the same place all the time? It's under the WFTDA banner. We train the announcers, like all of the things that go into the broadcast, we come up with and train and put together, because I was seeing this world where Whip It and even some of the the production teams that clubs had been working with, like Mav TV. I don't know if you remember Mav TV. They were kind of like, I think they were part of Root Sports, small sort of regional sports networks, and then eventually bigger networks that featured mostly like hockey and contact sports. But there was this sort of race to kind of get in front of what roller derby should look like on broadcast before somebody kind of swooped in and took it over. So it was not so much that film, but it was Whip It that certainly spread the word about roller derby. But it was also very complicated because when people showed up, they were like, this isn't what I saw. This isn't what I saw Drew Barrymore do.
Right.
There was also an A&E series that came out around the same time as Hell on Wheels.
Roller Girls.
Which also was in Austin, right?
Yep. That was influential.
I saw Whip It at the time. I mean, it was sort of like in that whole momentum of early roller derby really kind of taken off. So I think they were trying to catch that wave a little bit, maybe. I remember roller derby of the 70s, like watching it as a kid. And that seemed to me a little bit more performance based. I don't know if there's, major differences between current as opposed to what they were doing in the 70s. Like, is there any correlation between the two? To me, those women were more performers, almost like, professional wrestlers, so to speak.
And depending on the iteration, bank track is a version of the sport that is played, and it does have rules, and it is hard, and it is athletic. But exactly what you're saying, I think, was very much what was happening, what people thought roller derby was at that time as well. And I think the very complicated reality of modern roller derby is that it is athletic, and it is presented as athletic. And that was intentionally designed by the creators of the modern day iteration, because they said, this is really fun. We could really do something with this. And we don't need the theatrics, because that actually does make it more dangerous. And some of it came down to insurability, because the other part of this is when you are a group of like ragtag skaters in Austin or elsewhere, and you decide that you want to sort of start a sport and it's on roller skates, like, people are bound to get injured. So then how do you go about trying to ensure the safety of the sport? And insurance was part of the conversation. And, it's really hard to insure something like a roller derby where people are elbowing each other in the face and sort of pushing each other and being theatrical. And it was a sort of hard line that I think that the founders of the sport had to draw, the modern iteration, to say, we don't want to be WWE. We don't want to be wrestling. We don't want to be professional wrestling. We want to be athletic. And it was not without debate, but that's the line they drew.
I want to talk a little bit about during the time where roller derby was starting again, getting more attention, I guess, in the early 2000s, right? Around there. How did you see, like, the growth of the sport from then until now? And were there any kind of, like, real tensions or growing pains in that time for the sport?
Yeah, like, that's mostly what the book is
Okay.
about, too. It's like, so yeah, I will also say that you're totally right, Renee. Like, Roller Girls was a show that had a lot of, I think that was kind of the initial first introduction that a lot of folks around the US had to it who got involved in the early iteration. And I think there was maybe 20 or 30 clubs around the country that are sort of considered like the grandmother clubs, or as we call them, leagues. Philly was one of them. And folks watched those shows, and including me and my friends, we watched that show. And some of my friends watched that show and they were like, hey, there are tryouts in Camden for what is now Philly Roller Derby, was then Philly Roller Girls. And that's how I ended up at my first game in 2006, is I was like, one of my friends decided to try out, and she went through the whole process, and then she had her first game and I went to watch, and I was like, I have no idea what this is, but I love it. And I think that's how a lot of folks got involved. And so it really went from those sort of 20 or 30 first few clubs in the United States to the WFTDA at COVID was about 450 around the world. I think that there were 23 countries that were included on that list. So roller derby's expansion, I believe, went very, very in tandem with the rise of social media and the internet. It was a technology-based growth process where people, and the broadcast platform that I had put together in 2010 going into 2011 and 2012 was one of the drivers for kind of opening roller derby up to other people who were interested in watching it. And it was and kind of was remaining very community oriented and community facing. So we were broadcasting to a lot of other skaters. But when they found us, they were like, I can't believe there's so much of this out there. I'm so excited. And The growth was pretty explosive. I would say around 2000, between 2010 and 2020, I think was sort of the biggest jump. And that's where we went all the way, like we grew by the hundreds of clubs in that decade. And a lot of it had to do with the work that we were putting into marketing and broadcast. And it was all digital, right? Like everything was done on a digital platform. So it was not like we were driving around to cities and putting up billboards, and like everything was on Facebook. Everything in the olden times was on MySpace, and then we moved it into Twitter, and then we moved it into Instagram and TikTok. But I don't really know of many other sports that kind of grew organically in that way. I can say there are other movements that have grown organically in that way, but in terms of the sport of roller derby, it was very critical to the explosive growth. And then there have been many problems around that growth, because I think when you are really sort of revolutionarily thinking about the idea of taking a piece of chalk or some tape into a parking lot, drawing an oval, and calling it flat track, right? You're not thinking about the systems required to integrate 450 organizations around the world into one unified system. And so the problems that roller derby encountered had to do with scaling fast enough to be able to accommodate the number of people that wanted in. And that's a really good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless.
Where do you think the sport's going to go?
So I think what's really compelling to me, we live in the United States, and in the United States, we have deep disregard for human rights in ways that we didn't have as explicitly 10 months ago, even. And that compromises what roller derby has been trying to do, certainly. But this summer, I had the opportunity to do a lot of book promoting, and sort of my publisher put together a Kickstarter for us to get the book production costs covered. And we went to Innsbruck, Austria for the Roller Derby World Cup. And I think they had 48 teams from around the world. And to be able to step into a venue where thousands of skaters who are not necessarily all American are able to live and engage at a level of personal, political, religious, ethnic freedom, to be able to live at a level of freedom that we have often taken for granted in the United States and now are under threat of losing. Roller derby is alive and well in other parts in the world and does not come under the same scrutiny. That doesn't mean that it won't at some point, but I have a lot of faith that the rest of the world is just as interested in maintaining these freedoms and protecting rights in ways that roller derby has been doing. And it's exciting to be able to know that maybe the future isn't American, and that's okay. And we have to respect that and understand that while we continue to fight to protect what we need to here. Know that there is a whole other ecosystem out there that is taking that concept and living it in ways that we might not be able to do right here, right now.
Amen.
For sure.
That was a great answer.
If a young person picks up your book and says, I want to do this, what would you tell them?
Yeah, you do. You totally do. I coached juniors for several years, and including my son, which is also in the book. And it was some of the most rewarding moments of my life, because I had this amazing conversation with somebody about this the other day. I did not have roller derby when I was growing up. And holy cow, if I had had roller derby when I was growing up, if I had had older women to look up to who were like, what you are right now is amazing. Like, don't let anybody tell you that you are not amazing as you are right now. You want to change your hair color? That's also amazing. Go ahead. You feel like your pronouns don't describe you? Also amazing. Let's get at that, right? if I had had that kind of welcoming environment when I was in my youth, like, man, my life would have been different, right? Like, just the years of therapy that we've had to fight through to kind of shed some of that baggage of the restrictions that have been put on us by previous generations. So much trauma. And the way that we have been getting to engage with kids through sports is life changing, not just for those kids, but like healing on a level for me that I did not expect because I was able to offer those kids something that I did not have myself.
Another great answer. Check.
Check.
We could talk about childhood trauma. That's another episode.
Right?
That's a whole nother episode.
Or
We could
several.
go.
That's my book.
Yeah.
But I have to wait until all my siblings and my father die before I can write that because they won't want it to be written, you know?
Yeah. Or you could write it and just hold on to it.
Yeah, I could start. Maybe next year, Joelle.
What do you hope readers take away from Don't Let Them Eat the Baby, whether they've never strapped on skates or have been in the rink for years?
I was thinking about this the other day. You would think that I would have this answer like ready to go because I spent 2.5 years writing the book. But I think if I have to boil it down to its essence, the cost of being yourself is high. The cost of not being yourself is higher. And that's really what I want people to kind of take away from the book is that authenticity is hard. Inauthenticity, living a life that's not yours, living a life that's somebody else's life, that's not authentically who you are, is going to cost you so much more than what you think it's going to cost you to try to be who you are. And I think we are living in a time where our society is making that less easy for people to be able to do. But that's why I think it's more critical than ever that we are able to fight for that. Because I've lived decades of not really knowing how to be myself. And it's been struggle after struggle after struggle after struggle. And so being able to kind of like, it's like working with those kids and being able to kind of open that freedom up to them to kind of experiment or explore who they are in ways that they hadn't been able to do before. I think everybody deserves that. And that's what roller derby gave to me. And that's what I want people to be able to sort of embrace, hopefully, by reading the book.
Thank you. Great.
How can our listeners find out more about the book and more about you, learn where you're going to be doing readings and where to find the book?
You can find the book wherever books are sold. They will be able, if they don't have it in stock, they should be able to order it for you. But all of the major outlets are able to, you can buy it on barnesandnoble.com, Powell's Books, yes, Amazon. But we also have many incredible indie bookstores in and around the country that are able to order it for you. Folks can learn more about it by going to my website, ericavanstone.com, ERICAVANSTONE.com.
And now it's time for our speed round. So question 1, what is the best roller derby nickname you've ever heard?
My favorite one, I think the skater was from the Pacific Northwest, Jalapeno Business.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's one of my favorites.
If you could make the ultimate sandwich, what would be on it?
I'm a vegetarian, but you know what? I am a huge sucker for the like, is Wawa the Pilgrim or is Wawa, like it's whatever the Thanksgiving sandwich is that like Wawa and Primo do in Philly with stuffing, cranberry sauce. I like to actually get like the fake like field roast. I get tofurkey and I make that sandwich, and I have lots and lots of feelings about, you know, colonization, but I like that sandwich.
All right, next question. What character from a movie, a book, TV show, you name it, do you relate to the most and why?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. Huh.
We'll start the clock.
Yeah, let me think about this.
I've always thought that that song from Jeopardy, you know, the clock, the dun na na na, at the end, where it goes dun 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 dun, sounded like I'm a Little Teapot.
Oh, yeah. You're right, it does. That's so funny.
I know, isn't it weird?
When I get into a place where I'm writing books, I feel like I kind of like inhabit the character when I'm writing for a little bit. And I really like strong women characters. Like that kind of is my bread and butter for a lot of the like even the fiction stuff that I write. And one of the shows that I watched over the last couple of years that I've really loved is Hacks.
Mm-hmm.
Have you watched Hacks?
Oh my gosh.
With Jean
yes.
Smart?
Can't get enough of it.
So I think what's brilliant about that show is I've related to every single character on that show, and they're all flawed. And that I think is what is brilliant about that show, is because it's not like a show full of perfect characters. Like every character is like you're rooting for them and then they do something horrible and you're like, "Oh no, why did you do that?" So I would say like recently that show was definitely one where I was like, I resonate with all of you at very different times.
We're all just a hot mess. So what item do you hope will be obsolete in 20 years?
What item do I hope will be obsolete in 20 years? I hope that two-party politics is obsolete in 20 years. Not because we're under authoritarian rule, but because people have realized there's a breadth of experience and interest. We've opened up the door to more conversation.
If you were a fruit, which fruit would you be and why?
I gotta say apple. I'm from New England, so I feel like a good apple? No, a good apple. Not like a mushy apple. You know how I've had some really great experiences going to sort of pick actual apples off of trees in orchards in and around the Philadelphia area. And those apples, when you bite into them, are 10 out of 10. So that's what I would like to be.
Now it's time for a question down the lane, where each episode we ask our guest to provide a question for our next guest. So our last guest has a question for you. If you had a time machine, what time period would you go to and what would you want to do there?
If I had a time machine, one of the stories that I'm actually really interested in researching for a project is Elizabeth Roebling, who actually finished the Brooklyn Bridge. Her husband, Washington Roebling, got very ill during the development of the bridge. And this bitch picked up those blueprints and she was like, I've never done this before, but what the hell? If he could do it, I could do it, right? And then she did it. She was like, yep, here we go. I don't know anything about anything. And honestly, like that, I think is one of the most valuable things that I've ever gotten from roller derby. Because if you come into a roller derby league, a roller derby club or a team, you're asked to volunteer for committees and you have to do bout production. So you have to learn PR. You have to learn how to send emails to news stations. You have to learn how to lay down track. You have to learn how to sell sponsorships to people. You have to learn how to sell tickets to people. You have to learn how to do all of these things to produce events and to get people to come to them. It completely changed my mindset from being a person of, I don't know how to do this, to I'll figure it out, right? And now we're in a world where we're like, I'll just watch a YouTube video about it. But, you know, at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, right? Elizabeth Warren Roebling is there in New York City. Her husband is super sick. And she's like, well, I guess I'm it. I guess I'm the one who's going to finish the Brooklyn Bridge. So she like just got it done. Did she know how? Was she an engineer? Actually, yes. Did people know anything? Did people know this about her? No, they didn't. She figured out how to get this job done. She got the construction coordinators together. She got all of the communication, the on-site folks to do everything they needed to do, which, by the way, they're drilling down into a riverbed with technology from the Victorian era. And she managed to get this done. Like, it's an iconic bridge, right? Like, you think about New York City bridges, this is like probably the one that you think about.
Yes.
And you know it by sight. It's in so many pieces of media. And it's not like she's on the dollar or anything, or she's not like she's on, she's very, very low key, not known. And I think I would just love to kind of go back and be like, yeah, you just were kind of one of the first women to be, probably not the first, but like one of the more notable women throughout history to kind of be like, if he could do it, I could totally do this. I'm just going to keep going with this, right? Yeah, I would like to talk to her.
They did have that character on the Gilded Age
Yeah,
show.
I saw that. I thought that was pretty rad.
Yeah.
One of our former skaters is actually on the Gilded Age.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Margaret Thrasher was her skater name. Ashley Atkinson is her government name, and she is brilliant. And she was a brilliant announcer, a brilliant skater, and is a brilliant actress.
You should maybe do a book of like roller derby names. Like there's a book of baby names.
I think there are a couple derby name generators out there.
I mean, I'm sure you've been all over the world and heard a lot of really good ones. So,
Erica, it's been a great conversation. It's good catching up again. And thank you for sharing your story. And we are excited to read the book.
Thanks for having me.
it's been a pleasure. It's great to see you again.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share Podcetera. And be sure to follow and like the series wherever you enjoy podcasts.
For Podcetera, I'm Renee Lego.
And I'm Joelle Ludovich. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.